There are over 2 billion people in the world today who will be born, live, and die without ever hearing the good news of Jesus Christ. That means over the next 6 minutes while you watch this video, 180 people will die having never heard the gospel and probably having never even met a Christian. With all of our missions efforts worldwide, how are there still so many people living without access to the gospel? A few years ago, there was a man who we'll call John, who lived in a region that's been referred to as the graveyard of missionaries. Christian workers came and went to this region without ever seeing any fruit for their labor and oftentimes facing harsh persecution for their faith. So when John became a believer, he had a desire to share the gospel, but he didn't know how. The people around him had no understanding of who Jesus was, and to be honest, they didn't care. This region is one of many that has no indigenous church with the ability to reach its own people. Someone born into this particular people group will live their whole lives without ever hearing the truth, and when they die, they will fade away into a Christless eternity. So when John began sharing the gospel with his friends and family, he faced pushback and saw no positive results. The efforts to reach this people group were falling short. Now you may be thinking, surely the church is doing something about this. Surely we're making progress. But in reality, it seems like the church as a whole has forgotten that these people even exist. 2,000 years after Jesus gave us the command to make disciples of all nations, and yet there's still over a third of the world that has practically no access to the gospel. To make matters worse, the number of unevangelized people in the world today is growing by 19 million a year. General church strategy has stayed the same, while the number of unevangelized is increasing. Need I remind you of the definition of insanity? It's evident that we need a clear understanding of what missions really is if we ever want to take the gospel to these most unreached places. But today, I don't want to just tell you what missions means to me. I'll do you one better. Let me tell you what missions means to God. Missions is doing whatever it takes to see God worshiped in every tribe, language, and people of the world. Missions is not asking, what can I do, but rather what must be done. When we look at the word mission in regards to the military, there's nothing aimless about it. Soldiers know exactly what their strategy is, the tactics they need to use, and the goal at hand. When a soldier is deployed, he or she does not go in blind because they've spent substantial time mentally and physically preparing for whatever they may face. They do not ask, what can I do? They ask what must be done. The end goal determines their strategy. Throughout Scripture, we see military analogies used over and over again. In 2 Timothy 2, Paul exhorts Timothy to stay focused on his mission by reasoning that no one serving as a soldier gets entangled in civilian affairs, but rather tries to please his commanding officer. It's evident that we as Christians should view our task as seriously as a soldier views his mission. Jesus gave his bride a mission in Matthew 28. And we know that the Great Commission will be fulfilled in the last days when we see in Revelation 7 that every tribe, language, nation, and people will stand before the throne of God in worship. On that day, our mission will be complete. But how will we ever get there? After years of trying the traditional evangelism methods, John attended a training where he was taught to examine Scripture and look at the disciple-making strategies that Jesus used. With the Bible as his strategy manual, he learned to effectively make disciples who make disciples. Then, when he met a man who we'll call Kevin, he shared his testimony with him and told him how Jesus had transformed his life. Eventually, Kevin gave his life to Christ and then started a church in his house, while John was able to continue discipling him along the way. In less than 2 years, Kevin, his wife Rachel, and the 47 leaders they trained had planted dozens of churches in this community. An Acts-like movement of God has begun in this region, and today, Over 20,000 churches have been planted because disciples are making disciples who plant churches that plant churches. It's not radical, it's biblical. If we're taking missions seriously, then we need to ask ourselves this question: how can we give every single person in our generation the chance to glorify God by responding to the good news of Jesus Christ? At Beyond, we've discovered that the most effective method of evangelism is the biblical model of making disciples who love God and love others. Just like Jesus, Beyond equips everyday men, women, and children to make disciples who make disciples and plant churches that plant churches. Through this rapid reproduction of churches, whole cities and people groups have the chance to hear the good news of Jesus Christ and become followers of God. So how does this apply to you? As Christians, we are all deployed by God to finish the mission that Jesus gave us. If we follow the commands and strategy that Jesus provided, we can take the gospel to the ends of the earth. But if we claim that the gospel is for the whole world, we must believe that the Great Commission is for the whole church. Only then will Matthew 24:14 be fulfilled. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in every people group, and then the end will come, and you have a part to play. Will you watch the final lap, or will you run it?